Hey, I just want to say thank you to all the patrons of the Workshop Therapy podcast. You guys make this show possible. If you're finding the show helpful and want to support it, there are a few tiers, including a simple $1 a month option to just say thanks. For $5 a month, you get access to the patrons-only video and podcast that has the pre-show and post-show, in addition to the regular podcast all in one feed. We all know the good stuff happens after the official mics are off, right? If you can't support financially, I totally understand, but I'd love it if you left a 5-star review or told a friend about the podcast. Welcome to the Workshop Therapy podcast. I'm your host, Andrew, and today I have an interesting story for you. In 1995, a man named MacArthur Wheeler made headlines in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for a rather odd belief that he had. He was convinced that he possessed an extraordinary ability, an ability that would render him invisible to surveillance cameras. And what was his secret weapon? It was lemon juice. So he really believed that by rubbing his face with lemon juice, he could slip past security cameras. And so, fueled by this unfounded confidence in himself, he decided that he was going to commit a series of bank heists in broad daylight. So he went into these banks with no disguise whatsoever. He'd made no attempt to conceal his identity because he believed that this lemon juice's magic power would protect him. And so it wasn't too long after that the authorities, looking at the security footage, identified him and arrested him. So he denied it at first, and then when they showed him the irrefutable evidence of his own face on camera, Wheeler was left completely confused because he insisted that the lemon juice should have made him invisible to those watchful eyes. So, what's this story about? So this story is mentioned in a paper by two psychologists called Dunning and Kruger, and it's the Dunning-Kruger effect. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is a psychological phenomena named after David Dunning and Justin Kruger. At its core, it's a cognitive bias that describes how people with limited knowledge or competence in a particular area tend to overestimate their abilities. So, in other words, it's when you think you're way better at something than you actually are. This is why, 90% of drivers believe that they're better than average. That's one of those Dunning-Kruger effect biases. So it kind of starts with a lack of self-awareness. When people are relatively new to a task or a subject, they don't have experience to actually accurately assess their own performance. This leads to a lot of overconfidence. I mean, you see this all the time in social media where people think that they're fantastic at their particular skill and feel like it's completely okay for them to give advice to everybody else, even though they may not be a subject matter expert. In the beginning, people with low competence tend to rate their skills way higher than they should. And funnily enough, this is the Mount Stupid phase of the Dunning-Kruger curve. So then as they gain more knowledge and experience, they start to realize their limitations and they enter what's called the Valley of Despair. This is where their confidence takes a real nosedive, sometimes even lower than it should because of their actual abilities. I think you see this a lot of the times with makers in general, where they tend to underestimate their skill levels, especially to other creative people, other makers. They, like, oh yeah, you could probably do this too, when in actual fact, no, you can't. So, how can we guard against falling victim to the Dunning-Kruger effect in our own lives? Number one, it's important to self-reflect, be aware of yourself and assess your abilities and get some feedback from people you trust. This is where social media is kind of great. We have a community of people that you interact with on a regular basis who can give you some sort of information about, yeah, that's cool, that's good, that's bad, maybe you could improve this. The other part that's really important to avoid falling victim to that is to not assume that you know everything already. Establish a pattern of lifelong progression and learning. Recognize that there's always more to know, and expertise does take time to develop. It's also important to be humble. it is important to accept criticism from others, especially when you ask for it. But be open to that criticism and recognize that, yeah, this is potentially an area for improvement for me. So there you go. The Dunning-Kruger effect. I think we can probably point to all of those negative commenters on the social medias that they are victims of the Dunning-Kruger effect, because people who typically know what they're doing, they don't typically run other people down who are learning. Anyway, thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the Dunning-Kruger effect brief rundown. If you have any questions, any thoughts, any comments that you want to make, feel free to record them and email them to me at workshoptherapypodcast.com, questions@workshoptherapypodcast.com, and I'll throw it into the show. Also, I'd appreciate any reviews on Apple Podcasts. Apparently that helps. And the little 5-star things on Spotify works good. I notice a fair amount of people are on both of those platforms, and they both have those feedback options. Also, if you are on Spotify, there's little questions associated with that you can answer sometimes. I put polls up there about topics, whether or not you enjoy the show, and I'd appreciate that feedback there. Or send it to questions@Workshop Therapy Podcast. Either way. Hope you're all having a good night, or a good day, whenever you're listening to this, and have a good one. I just want to say thank you to the founding members of the Workshop Therapy Patreon family: Eric of Overall Makerworks, Keith Drennan of Blackthorn Concepts, Brad of Brad's Customs, Matthew Serio from Arciano Serio, and C. Grant Alexander. If you want to join on Patreon to support the show or just say thank you, I'd appreciate it.